Hey you spooky looters, today I'm going to talk about my second favorite spellcaster, second after Druid, but in second place is the Warlock. I'm all about that spook factor, but I'm going to tell you a little secret, not all Warlocks have to be spooky. The number one tip that I have for Warlock players is to really play into that patron relationship. Because without a patron, what are you, just a half-casting wizard? There really is no Warlock without that patron bond. And so in this video, I'm going to explore all of the different types of patrons that are available to you as a player. I'll go over motivations, what sort of pact they might expect from a Warlock, and I'll go over my favorite from each type so that you can kind of see how they play into the Warlock relationship. I've linked to my full article in the description below. In that article, I've listed all of the patrons that I found in manuals and explained some of their backstories, their lore, and why they would want to make a pact with a Warlock. Follow along with that link, bookmark it for later. A lot of the times a player will think that a Warlock is trying to get power for a very nefarious reason, and that is a trope that people can play into. But I think all Warlocks share one common theme, and it's that they are seeking knowledge and power. They look to a higher magic being in order to find that. Now, not all patrons are slave drivers to these Warlocks, or Ursula to Ariel sign a dirty deed that is really bad for the Warlock. A lot of relationships for Warlocks and patrons are more like mentor-apprentice. I think it's really important as a player to get an idea of what sort of patron you want to have, and then really just hammer it out with your DM. Patrons can be world-altering. Maybe as a character, your Warlock doesn't even know who their patron is necessarily. They just know that they've signed a pact with some unknown magical powerful being who is giving them power as they move along. And through gameplay and advancing the story, perhaps the Dungeon Master will want to reveal more about this patron. Or perhaps maybe a patron will ask a Warlock to do something against their character nature or against the party's nature. And this is really something that a Dungeon Master should be prepared for. So as you as a player gets to decide which patron you'll be serving, you really need to fill in your DM with these details and then let them fill out the rest. The goals, motivations, the deeds that are asked. This is all what your DM will decide. Nevertheless, in each category of patrons available, there are listed nearly half a dozen names that you could have done research for. I've done it for you. And each patron listed will flavor the relationship differently, the motivations, what might happen in the future gameplay. So without further ado, let's start by exploring the Archfey patrons. Archfey are ancient Fey beings who have crazy amounts of power and secrets not known to us mere mortals. Archfey are typically eccentric in what they strive to do, and it's likely that an Archfey will ask the Warlock to do something to fulfill an ancient grudge. Fey creatures are wily in and of themselves, so imagine a Fey creature who has vast power, perhaps rules over the world of the Fey lands, and now has been bestowing power onto the Warlock. What would they ask in return? My favorite Archfey deity is Oberon, also known as the Green Lord. You can read about him in Monster Mythology, a manual from 1992. But we learn that he is the king of the Seelie Court, which is like the fairy court, I believe, the Fey court. He was a skilled warrior and tracker. He loved spending time physically in the Beastlands hunting, tracking. He's volatile in his emotions like a river, but he's strong physically like a great oak. He doesn't deal much in the political machinations. Rather, he avoids them using wily illusion and magic. He is a god who protects the Fey with his brute strength. I think this patron would be awesome for a weapon-wielding Warlock who focuses on strength while also retaining their good alignment. Probably someone who is more of a friend to nature, especially the Feywilds, and would for sure fulfill more of a master-apprentice relationship with their warlock. Oberon would likely ask the warlock to help the Feywild to protect it in any way possible when needed. Or might even use the warlock to circumvent having to work politically, use the warlock to navigate that for themselves perhaps. But this warlock would definitely be more rooted in nature. Another example of an archfey patron is an ancient hag. Hags are the opposite of Oberon. They're just repugnant in the Fae. They are sustained by evil, and they manipulate souls into doing their biddings. They often find joy for themselves in the misfortune of others. So a warlock who takes power from a hag probably would do so very selfishly and without even knowing what they're getting into. So this would be like the typical, you sign a contract and then your soul gets sucked away because you don't really know what you're doing. But because hags are just very like self-centered and savage, they would probably require a lot from a patron, from a warlock. But hags are keepers of forbidden knowledge, which is very appetizing to a warlock. This sort of knowledge is discovered through dark divinations and arcane pacts. A warlock with a hag patron would compromise their morals, and they would become more corrupt as the campaign goes on, but they would definitely be complicit in their corruption. And what the hag would get out of this is just sheer elation watching a mortal fall into corruption. This could be really cool for a dungeon master to set up some sort of redemption arc for a warlock who has fallen into this corruption and then finds their way out of it through help with the other players or something. But it's definitely a great patron for character development in whichever tip of the scale it goes. Alphabetically, the second type of patron is the celestial patron, who is filled with light and goodness, but also righteousness and sometimes a little too far in the justice realm. A celestial patron would ask their warlock to bring light to the dark places of their world. For instance, this could include solars or demis, but I think one really cool example of a celestial is the Kirin, which is basically like a golden shimmery unicorn bird. Kirin serve good and oppose evil, and they are like super resistant to magic, so they're hard to like defeat. Even though they're technically a monster that a person could find and fight in the physical world, they are hard to find. They're often seen floating above, far out of the reach of evildoers. They might ask their warlock, who is receiving light and magic powers from them, to fight evil on the material plane. And because they're like floating in the sky and looking over the mortal material plane, perhaps they see evil being wrought on the plane and point their warlock in that direction, say, hey, go take care of this. The next type of patron is the fiend. Picture devils or fiends themselves. They seek to bring evil upon all lands, to corrupt all things, much like the hag. A pact with this patron is probably an act of desperation for a warlock. So in your backstory, perhaps someone that you love is dying, or the city that you have been tasked to protect is being destroyed by fiends, and you say, I will make a pact with you if you stop this madness. It is a last-ditch effort to accomplish your goals. But in return, you do gain power in order to fulfill the goals of the patron, the fiend. Or sometimes warlocks think that they're cleverer than the fiend that they're making a pact with, and they'll take that risk and hope like, by the time that I gain so much great power, I'll be strong enough to defeat this fiend that I made a pact with, and it won't even matter because I can just get around it somehow. The fiend will be the downfall of a good aligned warlock, even a selfish, perhaps evil aligned warlock, because all that they love and have will become the fiend's. One of my favorite examples of the fiend is Asmodeus. He is the leader of the devil race. He is lawful evil, Duke of Hell, and he seeks power over others in his realm and outside of his realm to become his realm. He is cunning and strong, and he likes to instigate problems between the other gods of hell. He often forms alliances with other of these gods, tears them apart, and then gets them to follow him in his stead, so he kind of gains power over their realms. Asmodeus would seek a warlock in order to oppress, exploit, or gain dominion over areas, perhaps races or religions of the material plane. Asmodeus may seem reasonable and eloquent in his speech, and that might be a way that he tricks a warlock into making a pact with him, so long as the warlock will sign away his soul for eternal servitude. The warlock will receive power in his lifetime. He's a very tricky devil, and a fun example of giving your character some spice and maybe a little arrogance, finding out that they're wrong or proving that they're right. From Tasha's Cauldron of Everything comes the Noble Genie patron. Genies are the rulers of elemental planes, and because they were bound in servitude by mortals, they often return the favor by enslaving mortals themselves. They are arrogant and they are hostile, and they are very powerful. Each of the noble genies relates to an element: earth, fire, water, air. But the earth genie, the noble Tao, he's obsessed with gems and precious things. He often enslaves elemental creatures to mine those for him. And without a promise of victory, Tao will not enter into battle. The Tao genies will steal land from other creatures, and they often just destroy for the sake of destruction. If a warlock promises wealth and precious things to a Tao genie, they will probably receive power in return. But this is a very tenuous relationship, because as soon as the warlock fails to fulfill their promise, the Tao can turn on them, and it's not going to be pretty. The Great Old One patron is a very old... The Great Old One patron is a very mysterious and ancient deity that is just incomprehensible to mortals. Their vastness, their knowledge, their understanding of secrets that don't even exist in mention anymore makes them a very desirable patron. A warlock who makes a pact with a Great Old One probably doesn't understand what's at stake, because there are so many threads or webs of conspiracy for these Great Old Ones that somehow a warlock is a drop of water in a lake of the plans of this patron. Well, one of the strangest patron examples of this is Zargon, who's the elder evil race tyrant, and his desires are to drench the entire existence of every creature, every world, in his slime. He is heartless and merciless, and he doesn't care about mortal beings at all. But I guess in one respect that he does care about them is that he loves to feed on them. He's got regeneration powers that makes him difficult to defeat, and he's basically immortal, and he's got acid dripping from his face, and he spews slimes and summons oozes. And basically a warlock who would select to serve him is sending mortal beings down the feeder into his mouth. I don't know. This deity will select strong warlocks to serve his purposes, and I think that warlock might just have to be evil or totally oblivious to what they're doing, because this deity will literally just eat him if he doesn't help out. From Xanathar's Guide, we've got the Hexblade patron, which is a very popular patron right now. It really helps warlocks in their physical attacks, but like imbuing them with curses and hexes. It's super cool. A Hexblade is a creature of the Shadowfell. They're basically spirits imbued into a weapon. So sentient magic weapons that have these ancient powers. And there aren't a lot of examples of patrons for this category, but the most well-known one is Black Razor, who is a sword. It's enchanted and radiates evil and wishes to control its user. Oftentimes a warlock who chooses a hexblade patron will wield a weapon very similar to their patron. I'm not sure if you would say the warlock would wield the patron itself. That's kind of strange. But if the warlock happens to get a weapon that is very similar to Black Razor, or perhaps Black Razor bestows a sword in and of itself, like unto itself, that warlock would become very bloodthirsty and wish to kill indiscriminately so that the sword could consume the souls of the victim. Another good example, though, of a sentient weapon as a deity is the Living Axe, which is a dwarf weapon god that a dwarven cult worships. Often sentient weapons are prisons for evil spirits that live eternally, but they're stuck in this weapon, and cults will often follow them. So I think a warlock of this cult could easily make a pact with this patron. Another patron from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is the Lurker in the Deep, or the Fathomless. These are creatures of the depths of the ocean, typically a primordial monster. Basically, a warlock who makes a pact with this patron is an informant for what goes on beyond their line of sight. On the land above them, they can't access the land, but they need to see what's going on for their own plans. So a warlock will serve as an informant for them. Perhaps this warlock nearly drowned at sea, and this great creature saved them in return for a pact. Basically, you dedicate your life to this thing that saved you. The only example that I give in my article is the Kraken, which are highly destructive deep ocean dwellers who surface to terrorize sailors and boats. They once were the king of the sea, and their hope is to return to that status. So a warlock who makes a pact with the Kraken may be bound to bring that to pass, help them regain their power along the sea, among the sea. This would be a great patron for a sea adventure. Next up is the very popular Raven Queen. This is an unearthed arcana. I don't believe it's been added to a book yet. Comment if I'm wrong. But the Raven Queen is a ruler of the Shadowfell, a harbinger of death. They usher on souls who have passed from mortality into immortality. They have limited influence over the mortal realm, therefore they make pacts with warlocks to help them keep an eye on what's going on and help people who are supposed to be dead stay dead. It's not really clear what the Raven Queen wants, what her motivations are, but she collects memories and emotions of loss and sorrow. Some speculate that this is in order to help her stay relevant and keep her rooted into reality so she doesn't just wither off and poof disappear. But it seems like her responsibilities are cosmically necessary, because what happens to a soul when they die, they need to go somewhere. According to a lot of lore in D&D, not all, but what happens to a soul who should be dead and doesn't go anywhere, stays in mortality, stays on the material plane, someone needs to take care of that. So the Raven Queen is very opposed to the undead, or someone who brings about the undead. And a warlock may be tasked with stopping necromancers or ending the lives of seemingly immortal beings. Next up is another unearthed arcana. It's called the Seeker. They travel through the astral plane in search of lost secrets. This is a good patron for a benevolent warlock who is just seeking philosophies to bring to their patron in return for power. They value learning and knowledge above anything else. One example that is my favorite is Gillian, who is a godly force of knowledge and a sage. And he believes that the soul can be perfected or expanded, elevated to a higher existence by learning and by seeking knowledge. So this deity would likely be a patron to scholars or sages or even librarians. But this unbiased observer is a big fan of agency. He would not enslave the warlock who seeks powers from them. He is rather a mediator between good and evil. So their goals may be to promote education around the material world, and to just bring about understanding on the four corners of the material plane. Up next is another unearthed arcana called the Undead. An undead patron has experiences and knowledge and secrets from all lifespans that they've lived. They have found the deepest secrets in the depths of the multiverse. Examples of this are Strahd and other patrons in the Ravenloft setting. I'm not going to touch on this because I'm currently playing Curse of Strahd and I did not want to research this. But I will give a few examples of other patrons, which would include liches. One lich is known as Acererak. Acererak was a lich who traveled the multiverse in search of powerful artifacts that he would then put into his dungeon, and he just loved watching adventurers enter his dungeon trying to get all these powerful items and just biff it, totally get enslaved. Their soul would be trapped in his dungeon. This was his thing. He didn't care about cults worshiping him. He wanted to enslave people. So a warlock who would seek this patron would probably get powers so that they can find powerful magic items across the material plane and send them to this guy to put him in his dungeon. He loves that sort of thing. The final patron type is the Undying from Sword Coast Adventure. These are immortal beings who have unlocked the secrets between life and death. Often they are liches, such as Vecna, who wandered the multiverse until his castle, his citadel, became his prison. Vecna is a very popular patron for warlocks because he has a perspective as a former mortal. He understands what it is to be mortal and to seek and lust for power. And because he is in opposition with the Raven Queen, they are an so he will often ask warlocks to help in his desires to thwart her or destroy her, because he is an undead creature, a lich, immortal being. He should be dead. He was mortal. He's not anymore, but he's not really dead. The Raven Queen hates him, and he wants to keep his life. So he will ask a warlock to thwart the Raven Queen. He also has a vampire enemy who destroyed the mortal body that he had, I guess when he turned into a lich. Cass the vampire destroyed his physical body. So Vecna might ask a warlock to mess with this vampire and his followers or his cult, whatever it is that he has. But warlocks who follow Vecna want eternal life just like Vecna did, and they will do things, probably evil things, that will bring them closer to eternal life, usually becoming a lich. They will fulfill Vecna's revenge in order for this immortality. So those are all of the warlock patron types that a player can seek. I hope that as you were listening to this, you were inspired to make this a part of your campaign as a warlock. If you chose a patron, figure out a little more about them, and try to figure out what their motivations might be, and what you as a warlock, what your motivations would be as well. Discuss this with your DM and try to figure out a way to incorporate all of this into the campaign such that your seeking of power and knowledge shapes who you are with the influence of your patron. Maybe you think you're smarter than your patron and they don't actually have power over you, and whatever contract you have signed, you're going to get out of it. And maybe your patron proves you wrong and your campaign is a slow descent into captivity. Or maybe you are a benevolent warlock and you have a patron that has asked a lot of you in the material plane to fulfill their purposes, to bring them whatever knowledge they want, or to save whatever area or race they have, and you find yourself elevated as a warlock, not in a spooky evil way, but in a I'm becoming powerful because I seek knowledge and I want to make the world a better place. All of these are possible with the warlock, and I'd love to hear your ideas and what you've done with your warlock, how your patron has really played into your campaign. Drop a line in the comments below. We're sure to look at them and respond to you. Check out our articles on flutesloot.com. Let us know what sort of articles and videos you want to see next. And in the meantime, happy adventuring!